Hello, gentle readers. It's about the 14th of December, 2025. Today in Reading Foundations will be a bit more of the unstructured and unscripted sort of dialogue associated with a survey of a collection of books, a little library, and the context of reading and foundations. Those being considered concomitant things with regards to the interpretation of events of the world, and for a kind of thorough and holistic and even monistic worldview, and one that here is according to Foundations for Reason, and including such usual precepts of science and these kinds of things, as well as according to truth. So that's kind of the usual subject matter, and it's a little bit more thoroughly explored in the considerations of Logos 2000 with regards to reason and rationality and nature and reality. And then also about moment and motion, about physics, reading from Einstein to help get a better view of what Einstein actually arrived at in his later career, from out of my later years. Maugin is having a very great and important development in the nonlinear, as according to how it's possible that otherwise the usual counts as after PDEs are incomplete. And so he shows basically an important development that these days is used for things like the simulation of quantum, the computing, and these kinds of things. Reading about the path integral. And then the descriptive differential dynamics is a sort of a second course after differential equations, and arriving at the importance of integral equations, which is usually considered, and naturally enough, a reciprocal and a complement, but entirely ignored. Then, as with regards to why it's necessary for these completions after the inductive accounts to arrive at this more repleteness in the settings. So there's mathematics and logic described as paradox-free, and about resolving the paradoxes of logic and mathematics. And then for the Pythagorean and the Cantorian, these representing kind of like the ancient classical tradition and then the modern mathematics way. One always rational, the other always transcendental, or at least almost all. Those being at odds with each other, and how to put them together for something like David Hilbert's postulate of continuity after Leibniz's principle of perfection. Why mathematics has real and natural infinities and continuity. That's considered the needful for otherwise that after all the great successes of mathematics, that there still is what Erdos puts it, the giant monster of independence about these multiple laws of large numbers, and as according to infinitary reasoning. Why to consider something after Zeno's arguments, that for Zeno's new argument that any change at all in velocity is infinitely many higher orders of nominally non-zero acceleration, infinitesimal, almost all of them. That these are the kinds of things that make for a pretty thorough account of foundations then again. So for reading, and then it'll just be some random books, and they won't necessarily be so about the canon and the dogma and the doctrine of reason and foundations. But they'll just be part of going through the stacks. So let's look to the stacks and see what it's brought today. First book appears to be a book about fishing. Fishing is the act of catching a fish. And one hopes it's a practice of the act of catching a fish. And so it's not something that I generally have a pastime of doing. My father is a much more of an outdoor sportsman, and at one point in time, one of his hobbies included making fishing poles out of graphite and the parts and the eyes and stuff like that, and the line and the twine and putting them together. So I have a great casting rod or a steelhead rod, it's called sometimes, and or like an 8 or 9 foot rod. And for the casting reel vis-a-vis the spinning reel, this being the usual idea of line fishing, vis-a-vis like traps or nets or these kinds of aspects to get involved with these kinds of ideas. That they'll mostly that's that and my bait box, tackle box are functional, and I've caught fish with them. Yet it's more of the romantic, that these days the economies of scale don't make it so necessary that people have to farm their own food or raise their own livestock or catch their own game or fish. That still it's just not an unusual thing. I have a T-shirt here from Buddy's in Salmon, Idaho. This is from the state of Idaho today, and Buddy's is a little location there of a restaurant of sorts, and it's got a picture of an elk on it, and it's from a little town is called Salmon, Idaho. It's a good not 8 hours away. It's a good 4 or 5 hours away, crossing about 2 or 3 times over the Continental Divide, which is of course the great dividing line between all the water and the watershed that flows west and all the water and watershed that flows east. That it's this kind of thing. Some time ago this summer, I went to Montana, and there's the headwaters of the Missouri in the middle of Montana. So that was interesting to think that that river starting there, right there, pretty much goes and flows all the way to the Ole Miss and the delta of Louisiana and out into the Caribbean Sea. Vis-a-vis that here there's a river and it flows into the Columbia and the mighty Columbia and out past Portland and to Astoria and out to the Pacific Ocean. That it's a place in the world. So growing up in a place like this was considered kind of boring and backward, yet at the same time kind of trouble-free and not an unhappy place, really. And then having like being 5th generation on both sides paternally, north and south, it's definitely part of an identity, and then after living in Seattle for 15 years, working for the giant corporations and living downtown, it's for that it takes all kinds, and there are many walks of life. And anyways, then this book is about fishing. Let's see what it says. Fishing Idaho, an Angler's Guide by Joe Avancho. Here's the River of No Return Wilderness, also called Frank Church sometimes. Frank Church was a senator from Idaho, and he's most well known for the church hearings in the 70s, because at a time and place when the government was greatly increasing its encroachment upon spying on people, vis-a-vis telecom and all this kind of stuff, that's what resulted a lot of the privacy laws. Privacy as a term doesn't necessarily mean that of being hidden. What it means is property, being one's own private property. So privacy means the ability to have one's own possessions, basically. So privacy, the word, is almost always usually associated with being subject to others and surreptitiously often and sort of the commons of the things with regards to reasonable expectations thereof and this kind of thing. The privacy. Yet privacy really is, as much as anything else, matters of personal disposition and the one's own ownership of self. So there's definitely already like rights to privacy guaranteed afforded by the Constitution of the law of the land. For example, with regards to effects and possessions and all these kinds of things with regards to the domain and what. then that kind of arriving as from a discussion about Frank Church, then it's also the part of that great wilderness is named for him. So this has got basically all the boat ramps and fishing spots and streams and bodies of water in Idaho. Oh, Henry's Fork, that's the southeast Idaho, kind of, or the north part of the southeast part of the Idaho. Idaho as a state it's the third largest state in the continental U.S. states, not including Alaska, by area, but also kind of like it was at one point the third smallest state by population, and then also at some point in time it had the third highest rate of millionaires somehow. I don't know how that worked out, but anyways, that's where it is here. Mentioning Island Park and things like that. The Big Lost River, Mud Lake, Camas Creek, Beaver Creek, Robert Scrabble Pond, McTucker Ponds, America Falls, Portneuf River drainage. This book basically describes all these things, and then it's just got connections to all sorts of anglers and these kinds of things. Fishermen are notorious hobbyists of the obsessive variety sometimes. Then this book is about fishes, and what it is the book of fishes. So this National Geographic Society book is from I think it's from about the 1920s or something like that. And what it intends to entail, but it's got color in it, so it's from later than that, with 236 species in color with biographies, 67 other color photographs, and 170 monochrome photographs. This is the 1952 edition. And so here's, for example, a picture of a man with his catch, and that's considered a great kind of celebratory moment, is a usual thing, from the National Geographic Society. And it's sad that many of these species in this book are endangered, rare, or extinct. So that's usually considered because of overfishing and habitat destruction. Because otherwise they've evolved over millions of years and live just fine. But then there's also, besides overfishing and habitat destruction, then there's the invasive species, when it becomes so that a given stock of fish, as fish are generally considered food or for sport, then has there's all kinds of things. So here's like mackerel and yellowtail, delicious fish. Once one might gain an appetite, say, for the raw fish or previously frozen fish, or that otherwise that's usually associated with sashimi and sushi and this kind of means of the preparation of food, or poke and these kinds of things, or ceviche, vis-a-vis broiling, grilling, frying the fish, farm fish, wild fish, freshwater drum, night prowlers. The the fishes have that there's one fish called the cichlid, and so the cichlid lives around the world. It's kind of like a bass fish, but the cichlid and so like a piranha is kind of like a cichlid. They're freshwater fish, and the cichlids and the tilapia have really just kind of there's a lot of those around compared to like schools of fish. Here's some farming of the fish, the hatcheries of the fish, and otherwise the electric batteries of a ray or a skate. These being kinds of fish. About salmon, it's very large. Salmon are considered particularly healthy sorts of food because they only live a few years, and so they don't collect all the pollutants as much, and they're a very, very rich source of nutrients, including, for example, brain food. So that's just a usual kind of thing. Fly fishing, casting, fishing. A dolphin, a mammal, not a fish. seahorses, baby sharks, lampreys, and the like, tentacles of octopi, squids, and the like, various forms of kelp, corals, sargassum fish, fishing, Key West, puffer fish, butterfly fish. So there's another book I have here that's a little bit more of like the freshwater fishes. And then that's the one that has more of the different species. Like it's hard to find a pike these days, or it's hard to find a sturgeon at all, which live for like 100 years at least. There's a story one time someone caught a sturgeon. It's catch and release. And engraved on that sturgeon's lip was the year 1928. So someone had caught that fish 100 years before. A history of Japanese mathematics. So, in a roundabout way, then, this is kind of like about the East and West. Because while in the West, there was, after the Cartesian and the orthonormal, the rectilinear, and the square as about these kinds of things, then we consider that the calculus got developed after like Cavalieri and the Mertonian school, and then later after Maclaurin for Newton and Leibnitz, and the kind of the European mathematics. So the Japanese mathematics, the central figure is Schichibei or Uchiyama, kind of like Japanese Newton. But what they're about is the yenri. So the yenri is kind of, it's basically like circles within circles and how they would go around. So like the spirograph or something like that. So they developed a calculus of a sort of this time and this place, 500 years ago or something. With regards to the history of Japanese mathematics, then, that's kind of what I see as kind of the particular thing. This text traces the development of wasan mathematics from its earliest period to the introduction of Western mathematics. Topics include the use of the soroban or abacus, of course, one of the great calculators, the application of sangi or counting rods to algebra, kind of like then for like the slide rule, and the discoveries of the 17th century sage Sekikoa, who is regarded as the founder of Japanese mathematics. In addition to its discussion of Seki's contemporaries and the possible Western influences, text explores the yenri, or circle principle, the work of 18th century geometer Ajima Chokoyen, who invented methods more sophisticated than those of Archimedes for calculating lengths of arcs of circles, and Wadane's contributions to the understanding of hypotrochoids. A Dover reprint has it that this is, then it was about the figures and the diagrams and thus the geometry's relation, algebra, and this symbolic forms. So as equi-interpretable, of course, with mathematics. Then with regards to Schichibei, I'll be looking around to figure out what his names would be, because what happened was he was adopted, and so then he then took the name of he took several names over his life, and so then in the histories these things, and with regards to the authorship and the writing of these things, it varies a little bit, but it's something to figure out some more with regards to these things. The Japanese Newton. This is some fiction. Fix by Leo Clancy. So there's people would be familiar mostly with Tom Clancy. He's an author, and he's got many later developments. Other people write on his works, and he was very famous or popular in the 1980s and some of the 90s, and many of his books became movies, and then this Leo Clancy though is a British guy, and so this is basically about It's about a robbery gone wrong, but it's interesting in its style because its narrative is kind of broken up and split up and put around. So it would be very conducive to like a treatment as a script, because a script of a movie is often the words, the spoken part, as it were, the descriptive things are just so much less than what's in a book. But this is a pretty good book, and then its narrative is with regards to transcriptions and like as of recordings of things, like as sometimes from the perspective of like, you know, somebody who's tailing or tracing them or something like that. But it's a good little bit. All right, now back into programming. If there's one language that's called the heavy lifting of systems programming, it's C, the C programming language, because it's supposed to be a reasonably high-level language with flow of control, yet close to the hardware in what it intends to entail. Pointers and arithmetic as being primitive in this language. And then C++ is one of the greatest then of the heavy lifters of systems programming, because it both has C together, that C++ is almost always C/C++. It's both of the languages together, vis-a-vis something just standard C by itself, C99 say, or with regards to something like C++ 2003, where they're basically different editions of these standards are developed over the years and named pretty much by the year in which they arrive. Has that one could look to like C99 as an enduring standard and very well supported and sufficient for things like long pointers and 64-bit world, the 64-bit world. And then the C++ 2003, and then there's 2008 and 2011. So my experience with C++ was really much more of up to 2003, say. That's considered to provide, after templates, enough strength in the language to make for metaprogramming and this kinds of things, besides having a very well-defined inheritance model of behavior and structure, and as regards to virtual classes and abstract virtual classes. Languages like Python, for example, implement these same kinds of concepts and patterns in their own in various ways. Java is certainly my bread and butter and main, and it's something that I've spent in most 10 kLokes writing in code. That these ones also have their notions of type. Java being strongly typed and Python being loosely typed, yet you can build via convention things like abstract-based classes and implementations of virtual interfaces. Java is what I consider to be about the best with regards to its development of types, virtual interfaces, and then C++ with its pure virtual functions and the usual ideas of inheritance and multiple inheritance, and including like the deadly diamond and multiple inheritance and these kinds of things. Then with regards to concepts like mixins and fragments, those making for then after aspect-oriented programming, kind of like the whole kit and caboodle of the things. The C++ is a great language for its types, and then also for its proximity to C, and so thus the proximity to the model of the machine itself, and where Java is interpreted to a layer of bytecode, and Python is above that. It's just interpreted on the fly. Although one may aver that can be compiled, and it can be compiled in the just-in-time and the compilation and these kinds of things. The C++ is great. So Bjorn Stroustrup is considered the developer of C++, and it came out of Bell Labs or AT&T, and as did C and Unix computers, very much so. AT&T, vis-a-vis Berkeley standard distribution. The idea otherwise that after the data plane, that the control plane was to be implemented in an interactive manner, the Unix computers. That C++ is great. So then this book is a very erudite, comprehensive work on the language and the design intentions of the language and the considerations thereof. That it's it being more than merely just kind of a linear account of this is what it is and this is what it does and this is what it has. That's it. Has that it's a great sort of account of the language overall and all the different features and in a kind of great narrative style. And so it's considered a very good book. It's very dense work. It requires somebody to have both an excellent knowledge of all the concepts and the language, and it's got the longer statements, and then also with regards to the formal and the models in the machine and resources and the program models, and then concepts and theories and types and matters of the pragma, if that may be said so, where the pragma used to be just like preprocessor instructions saying that in this code to affect this other part of the machine organization's requirements, pragma and pragmata, after the M4 preprocessor, which given, M4 and C, which is to, take the C code, which is procedural, and to replace its contents, makes for metaprogramming, that C++ always still has that in effect de facto there. C++, the M4 preprocessor being standard. And then for metaprogramming and template metaprogramming, then for traits and type traits, those being all at compile time and making for that what can be computed at compile time then becomes an invariant at runtime, so it's much, much faster than all the interpretation of that otherwise in the language itself. So C++ is a real great book, and this is, I think, the third edition. This is the special edition. So after the second edition, then the third edition, the special edition had some more late-breaking features that came out. So the special edition is considered the baseline of C++ that's everywhere, and it's all still in effect today. And then, of course, since there's some great affordances of syntactical sugar and making for unsurprising things with regards to like move and copy, with regards to otherwise things like the rule of three or the notions of pointers, and since that's considered necessary for systems programming, that C++ in 2008 and 2011 and these later editions, and even today, introducing new features into the language even today and making it a much simpler language to kind of get into, has that the special edition of the C++ programming language is considered the authoritative reference manual for C++. Then that usually, of course, these days it's all according to online reading of the manuals and the specifications of according to standard these things, and then also the integration with the integrated development environments that within IntelliSense, a product after Microsoft's Visual Studio, which helped provide autocompletion and lookup and context sensitive menus and these kinds of things. That C++ is fantastic, and it's something I'll be looking to get back into quite a bit more, because then the idea for the equi-interpretability is basically writing code that is pseudo-code that looks the same and really is directly representable in a subset of each of these languages, these higher level or 3GLs, 4GLs sometimes they're called, third generation languages or fourth generation languages. That being considered about the highest the languages can go, vis-a-vis like type 1, type 2, and type 3 reasoning about these things is from a conversation I once had with AI about AI and programming. That this book is considered a cornerstone of any desk of any C++ programmer. naturally. The rain lifted. Probably until tomorrow, and then it's going to start raining again. Centuries, I/O streams, formatting. Lesser used features these days. Interface classes inside the declaration definition. Compatibility, C compatibility. Output formatters. Date and time. There's a great book about I/O streams that gets more particular. And another one of the great features of C++ is operator overloading. So that if you can figure out what would be a natural sort of arithmetization, algebraization, or geometrization of these objects, then the code can be written as with just the operators like plus and minus and some of the other reference operators. Not all the reference operators are overloadable. So operator overloading is another great thing in C++ when that it's possible to define a natural thing like concatenation or otherwise any kind of formal reduction in terms to where it makes sense for these objects that they'd only have these operators applied for them. Then the syntax allows that it's possible to write, say, plus and minus instead of like add the words all in the more long forms. So yeah, that's just one other feature of C++. So what I'm thinking about in programming languages these days is basically a templating and typing assembler language, because assembler language, these languages, these higher level languages, then get compiled down to the 2-generation languages and 1-generation languages like assembly language, and then finally machine code, the actual instructions according to the instruction set architecture, these things. So the idea of a templating and typing assembler language is to have just above assembler language that their implicit types are already defined for those of the register transfer and the semantics thereof. And then the templating is just to make for bodies of routine and convention. When, for example, there's almost always all the same sorts of conventions of how functions and their interfaces are defined, the APIs for the ABIs, application programming interfaces for the application binary interfaces, the ordinals, the offsets to these objects is just lists of instructions to be jumped to or entered with go to or entered, and then to be followed sequentially, these instructions. The templating then is the idea is like, well, sometimes there's going to be various calling conventions besides standard API, besides fast call, these being various ways to say, okay, I'm going to call a function, and here's how I'm going to put the input arguments, and here's how I'm going to get out the output arguments, or the return values. That then is to make for a way to assemble code, and especially when it becomes necessary to that the machine architecture is a little bit farther away, basically for the vectors in the super-scalar, then that makes for big blocks of things. Vis-a-vis handling things like Fortran may do with large arrays, or about the stack and the heap and the object files and these kinds of things. That it's all one language in a sense. Oh, this is from Martin Gardner? No, Douglas Hofstadter. So when I mentioned Martin Gardner, he had this article, this column in Scientific American or something like that. And excuse me if I'm wrong, and I find him quite enjoyable and agreeable. It's mathematical games. And so this was maybe, I don't know if it was like American Mathematics Monthly or where it was. So anyways, for a while, Douglas Hofstadter, who wrote Goedel Escher Bach, The Eternal Golden Braid, and these kinds of things, all about things like paradoxes of self-reference and self-similarity and recursion and matters of language so involved. That Hofstadter is a great thinker, and Hofstadter's Goedel Escher Bach was definitely influential and a bestseller for many, many people as a matter of popularization. So here in this book, Metamagical Themas, it's an anagram of mathematical games. So mathematical games is got these letters in it, and so does this same phrase, metamagical themas. Questing for the Essence of Mind and Pattern by Douglas Hofstadter. So I got this book for a towering $8, it says, an interlocked collection of literary, scientific, and artistic studies. And here's some raving reviews, like from Martin Gardner. The incredible Dr. Hofstadter is back in Golden Braid form, with a collection of wide-ranging essays that swarm with extraordinary ideas, brilliant fables, deep philosophical questions, and Carolian wordplay, after Lewis Carroll or Dodgson, the Jabberwocky fellow, and Alice in Wonderland, and Through the Looking Glass, and this sort of thing, the Cheshire Cat, and what. The man is as incapable of writing opaquely as his alter ego Egbert B. Gebstadter is incapable of writing clearly. Like his previous Goedel Escher Bach and Internal Golden Braid, the new book glitters with Gödelian self-reference jokes, Escher-like illustrations, and Bach-like fugues. But don't waste your time reading this last sentence because it doesn't say anything. Martin Gardner. Then Dennett of Tufts says, this wonderful collection tackles virtually every area of fascination and controversy in science today, from mathematics and quantum mechanics through evolutionary theory to artificial intelligence, the nature of human thought and rational choice, and ties them together by showing how understanding in one area enhances understanding in others. Hofstadter realizes that before you can prove or refute anything, you must understand. Now, understanding is here considered a dangerous term, so I'll just leave it at that. That knowing is for foundations involves real truth and what. But it does indicate that the intuitive is to be there and the idea of what things are about. His deceptively leisurely tours of these many problem spaces are extraordinarily powerful imagination structures, brilliant pedagogy that is accessible to the beginner, perhaps even more valuable and eye-opening to the expert, whose mind is so often hemmed in by hard-won habits of thought. See, where now I've lived through all this before, and what I was reading is like talking about pi and approximations of pi. And worldview is in collision. A cartoon from David Moser's Metaculture Comics, 1979. Uwe Meffert's Pyraminx. It's kind of like when they had the Rubik's Cube, then they had that one Rubik's Pyramid or whatever. It's one of those. The Pyraminx. Smoke, turbulence, flow. Structure and strangeness. Lisp, atoms and lists, excuse me. Lisp is the language of lists. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and the many worlds interpretation. Here that's given out. For Heisenberg's uncertainty, we kind of make again a Heisenberg's certainty. For the Heisenberg and Schroedinger pictures of the usual quantum interpretation. And multiple worlds interpretation is considered a cop-out at best. Because it just says, well, we would have to have non-determinism, and so it could be anything. It's like, well, you can still have determinism and free will and just say that it's super classical and that thusly there's real wave collapse with regards to the conceit of particles. And then thusly, it's the multiple worlds or the Everettian approach is considered non-realistic, say. And more of the Achilles and Tortoise having a conversation. Symbols and formal rules. About 800 pages. This book. Hofstadter, best known as the author of GEB, also co-edited The Mind's Eye, that's also a good book, with philosopher Daniel C. Dennett, and for 2.5 years wrote a monthly column, Metamagical Themes for Scientific American. So yeah, this is for anybody who's read Goedel Escher Bach. It's considered that Goedel Escher Bach is pretty great. Then Metamagical Themes, it helps explore some more and the same kind of ideas, but it's a little bit different. Oh, great. I was looking for something like this. TCP/IP Illustrated Volume 3. TCP for transactions, HTTP, NTP, and the Unix domain protocols. So this is part of Aslan Wesley's books on network programming, and there's that. And what I've been kind of closely reading is about the about sockets API, networking, Internet Protocol, TCP/IP, and then TCP and UDP and SCTP, streams control, transfer protocol, and about the implementation of sockets and ARP and RARP and a little bit and DNS somewhat, IPv4 and IPv6. I'll be looking to read this a little bit more closely also, because what it is that all these protocols really need to be read off the IETF RFCs, the Internet Engineering Task Force request for comments, the standards of these things. And there's occasionally an erratum in the IETF RFC specs. Like one time I implemented one of those HOTP, TOTP passwords, or like authenticator, you'd call it on your phone, the MFA authenticator bit. So I went to the specification and implemented it, and then it was like, this isn't working, it's off, somehow it's wrong. And I'm sure I read it right. And then I looked to like the sample things, I'm like, here's the samples that are supposed to work, and I'm not getting those out of it. And then I found at one point in time, I was like, well, I suppose if I read this the other way, I could see, because it was a pretty short standard. So I could see how this could just be reversed, and so I'm just going to have to flip this because it's an erratum in this thing. Then I'll have to write to that. So mostly, though, all the standards that have been in the IETF RFC spec are there, and they're kept up to date. So they're regularly superseded by exact copies of what they were before. And so that just gets into then, a book like this gets into all the details of an implementation as well. Transactional TCP, some of the lesser known or lesser used features of these things. Reliable datagram protocol. It's like, isn't that like a contradiction of words? It's like, well, just they just call it quick today. They've just old rewrapped this as new, a bunch of these different things. So about like Massinter, MASINTR, that guy is kind of central. And Braden, of course. Jacobson and Cantor, Leffler. All these are the RFC authors from the 90s. Postel, one of the famous old guys. Postel's law is that be conservative in what you emit, so it's simple to understand, and liberal in what you accept, so you make sense of things, is Postel's law. So yeah, I'll be reading this a little bit more closely, as I'm interested in the protocol stacks, which are how all these different layers stack up to make a computer system work. Oh, good. And here's more of this other ones. This is volume 1 of the network programming, so this will go with it. I might have 2 copies of this book, and that gets into in a library. There's no reason to collect 2 copies of a book unless you plan to lend it out to somebody or something like that. Or one is for being all written up. I don't write my books, and the other one. Point being, usually I won't collect 2 copies of one book. But sometime when I'll be browsing the shelves or something like that, and not exactly sure what I have in all my stacks and library of books, I'll get 2. So far, all I know is that might be a duplicate because I'm reading something very similar, but otherwise it might just be volume 1 of 2, in which case I would definitely want both volumes of the book. Something like Courant's, integral and differential analysis, or, like Aristotle's prior and posterior analytics. That also I have 2 copies of Boyer's History of Mathematics, and that's considered pretty good. noticed that the other day. See here, getting into no. Hopefully, we'll just get through the rest of this box of books, and the next week some other thing. So this is this is children's literature. And what is this? And another book that we've looked at here some before. So this is a book that when I was a kid, my grandfather's called Great Grandfather in the Honey Tree by Sam and Zoa Swain. And so what it's about is like on this terrible rainy day, this guy is like a farmer kind of, a rancher. He lives out in the woods with his family. And so he goes out to like take care of all his business or whatever, and it is just the worst day. And I mean, everything's just getting worse all the time. And stuff's getting away, and it's getting lost, and it's getting rained on, everything's bad. So then as it comes to the end of the book, it starts rewinding, and all of a sudden it just all works out, and it all works out. And there's this kind of improbable chain of events that all the stuff that went wrong then somehow got rewound, and he woke up to like find this sledge, a sleigh with all this stuff just sitting in his front yard that he thought was just lost back in the woods. So this is not a very common book, but it's got great illustrations in the narrative. So he got back. He's like, after that, he went straight to bed. Then the warm rays of the morning sun wakened great grandfather, and then he could see everything just showed up. Great grandmother was delighted. Then this is the Martignoni, the Illustrated Treasure of Children's Literature. So there's the Illustrated Treasury of Children's Literature, and then the Illustrated Treasury of Children's Poetry. So that's like the green book, and this is yellow book. This is a fantastic, kind of like Book Trails. Book Trails is an 8-volume collection from before the 1940s of children's literature. And the way it's designed is that this starts easy, for people just barely learning to read, and then gets into, like, by the end of this, there's an excerpt from Aladdin, which is quite involved to reading Aladdin. Here's A Christmas Carol. These are excerpts, usually. The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. Let's see who wrote that. By Howard Pyle. And of these many stories. Lad, a Dog. Gulliver's Travels. Just a brief section, say. Story of King Arthur and His Knights, also by Howard Pyle. So that might be considered good reading. And then as with regards to Aladdin, or the about the lamp, from this title index and author index, Aladdin or the Wonderful Lamp, the story of, page 268. Here, and it's got great color illustrations. Here's his evil uncle or whatever. Here's when all the riches, after Aladdin was marooned in a cave and discovered the lamp. It doesn't have an author. It says it's from the Arthur Rackham Fairy Book, selected by Arthur Rackham. Illustrations from drawings by Arthur Rackham and H.J. Ford. So, and it's got everything from that to like back to fairy tales. Hickory Dickory Dock, Peas Porridge Hot, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, Pat a Cake, Jack Be Nimble, Mary Had a Little Lamb. All these, many others. Hot Cross Buns. Baa Black Sheep. Little Boy Blue. Hickety Pickety. Little Bo Peep. There was a crooked man, and he went a crooked mile. He found a crooked sixpence against a crooked stile. He bought a crooked cat, which caught a crooked mouse, and they all lived together in a crooked little house. These are Humpty Dumpty, Three Blind Mice, Jack Sprat. Everybody knew all of these at some point in time. Jack and Jill, Old Mother Hubbard. And then it gets into some reading. My grandmother gave me this book, so I've always treasured it. Then this is just a history of art. This is just a college text in art. Velasquez. So this is like in that book about deconstruction and the introduction to deconstructive and postmodern theory. Is it reminds me of that. Fragonard. Whoa. Architecture. Art and architecture. Clodion. Etienne Maurice Falconet. Inigo Jones. Jean-Baptiste Simeon Chardin. Robert Adam. Jacques-Germain Soufflot. These are artists in this book. Renoir, Manet, Impressionists, Courbet, the Impressionists, Whistler's mother, Claude Monet, Henri Rousseau. These are considered classics. And then into the modern art of modern being in the like the 1920s or so. Dali, the Surrealists, modern sculpture, these kinds of things. It reminds me a bit the other day, we were looking at this book from illustrations from Dante. And so that's considered more the religious art. And then for somebody like T.E. Holm, he said, well, it's really important that a lot of the art that's being uplifting was relating to matters of the ineffable as the unknowable as religious art. And yeah, that's not necessarily so the attachment, because it just seemed though he just kind of rejected the absurdity of surrealism, which is intending to accomplish the same thing. And so it's fair to say though that art is art and vis-a-vis subject matter, and it's realism or pretended realism, and that it's all kinds of things. Of course, it's a matter of interpretation and expression and emotion a bit. That is any art plainly just entirely unemotional? I don't know. I suppose that's a good question. Let's see here then. Well, a bit brief on time, but haven't got through that box of books. So I'll just get into the next box of books next time. So trying to figure out these kinds of things, what to do about it. Then, there's this Morris Klein's here, and it's something to look at, the loss of certainty. So this was something that was at the trail of the last talk, so it'll be nice to end with this as well. So what Klein is about, and I looked to study him a bit. So in the 50s or 60s, he was an educator, and so but he had been to like the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, and so he knew Einstein, and he knew some of these other major thinkers, and von Neumann, and so on. But what he was on about was that he saw that there was kind of a schism between the mathematics as you kind of understood it and the pure mathematics of modern mathematics, because there kind of is such a great abstraction, the severe abstraction, that there's at once a great fungibility in that, because it makes for so that the how one might say the abstraction for it's matters of relating to so many things is so. Then that it's separation from geometry and otherwise these ideal objects of mathematics is missing. And then saying stuff like, well, are objects of arithmetic or objects of algebra, or objects of geometry or objects of algebra. And it's almost fair enough to say it's the other way, that the objects of algebra are arithmetizations or geometrizations insofar as they're mathematical at all, according to form and structure. So that form follows function, but the idea, though, is that function is form in mathematics. So Klein, he was kind of an individual voice then, and held up as kind of the being of this sort of account of mathematical intuitionism, and as well with regards to the applied, and not with regards to the pure mathematics. So then in this book, The Loss and Certainty, as was noted last time in Reading Foundations, it starts with a quote from von Neumann called the math from a piece that's only about a page or two long, called The Mathematician, and then what it's about is similarly of that same sort of idea that it's one thing to make for so that yes, a mathematician may be lazy, and that it's a great strength, the abstraction and even the severe abstraction of mathematics. Yet it is well so two different things. One is that it's still got to be relatable. And so for the higher level language of the thing, the eventual form of like the resulting central theorems or most important theorems or fundamental theorems of particular fields need to have their intuitionistic attachments to matters in natural language, while not allowing for loose talk to break that and be wrong. And then another point is in the higher mathematics, what happens is that approximations and derivations get lost in the shuffle. They just are so far underneath it that they're not available to make the next step or leap in the development of these mathematics. And so for things like in physics, the severe abstraction, the mechanical reduction, has things as like people forgot that Hooke's law is involved in every single derivation that involves a mass spring pendulum system. And so when it comes out that's like, well, that can never make a perfect circle, then it has to be put back in. And so people are doing that way above, like with Kodaira and Zariski and Lescope about topological surgery with regards to otherwise what results not being analytical in otherwise these systems of like the linear equations, that there really is kind of needed to be made a great account of the unlinearity of things. And yet, so as the repleteness of these things and its connection to geometry. So this kind of goes back to the beginning of this talk with regards to the Pythagorean or the ancient Greeks and the Cantorian or the modern Germans, and then how it can be so that they aren't lost to each other. And so there's figured that there's kind of a middling road account of that, and it's. Here it's called, with regards to like the analytical bridges of otherwise these inductive impasses, that it's possible to have this kind of middling sort of account. Or at least also, I've got the AIs to agree and to also make for them to write after an account of Hilbert semantics, and for the formal after natural language to make it so in terms and for formal derivations. Why? There is a great account of bringing back together the Pythagorean and Cantorian, which otherwise don't agree and contradict each other. So all these kinds of ideas here in Foundations about like the paradox-free reason and the deconstructive accounts of arithmetic itself, and later on and also for geometry, the axiomless geometry, and then algebra is loose about those things instead of central and primary. With regards to model theory, and of course all of descriptive set theory, and the great account of a theory of one relation set theory, which would entail, after this equi-interpretability, all the same sorts of needful things of the mathematical reasoning to resolve what would otherwise be mathematical paradox. The Klein's account here is after just saying is like, well, new math is bad, it's not helping. Has it? There's kind of a balance, because then after new math, as it was called, which is like, in primary and secondary instructions, like everything's sets, compared to like an instruction where it at least starts as like there's a real number line, and there is geometry of spaces. But then after new math came out for a generation or so, then there was the new math, and it's not to be confused with the later accounts, because math has been like built up and put down the educational linear curriculum several times, even since the 1950s. And so the best one seems to be the one right after new math, because while set theory isn't central, it's yet in accordance with the reasoning, which is otherwise quite Pythagorean and classical all the way through for geometry and this kind of stuff. Then at the higher level accounts of what's higher infinities and these kinds of things, which are part of mathematics, of course, then can also resolve these what were called natural continuities and natural infinities, and not so much about the standard model of integers, the natural numbers, yet as those as kind of the result instead of the axiom. These are the usual kinds of accounts here. Well then, gentle readers, that said, I shall so hope you have a great day. Next time, if it's to be so, there'll be another different box of books, and I'll put these mostly away, except for keeping out these networking books as I'm working on some of the stacks there. And then I shall so hope you have a great day, and happy holidays, and Merry Christmas as it will be upon us here. Here's some little decorations up for it, some lights and these kinds of things in the spirit of things. With regards also to the fact that world traditions and world religions all have common goals of fellowship toward men and goodwill and peace on earth and these kinds of things. Hope you have a great day, and goodbye.